Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Living the Gospel of Life. I'm your host, Leticia Velasquez, and as always, I'd like to start with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. O Mary, bright dawn of the new world, Mother of the living, to you do we entrust the cause of life. Look down, O Mother, upon the vast numbers of babies not allowed to be born, of the poor whose lives are made difficult, of men and women who are victims of brutal violence, of the elderly and sick killed by indifference or out of misguided mercy. Grant that all who believe in your Son may proclaim the gospel of life with honesty and love to the people of our time. Obtain for them the grace to accept that gospel as a gift ever new, the joy of celebrating it with gratitude throughout their lives, and the courage to bear witness to it resolutely in order to build together with all people of goodwill the civilization of truth and love to the praise and glory of God, the Creator and Lover of life. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Today we're honored to have Eileen Haupt with us today. Eileen is a graduate of Trinity College where she studied business and computer programming, computers. She was a programmer for IBM up in Burlington, Vermont. She is a homeschooling Catholic mom of two girls, including her daughter Sadie, who has trisomy 21 or Down syndrome. Eileen has been a pro-life activist for a long time, including some radio and TV appearances with yours truly. She helped me write my book, A Special Mother is Born, by giving her story, which you'll hear today. She's on the board of Vermont Right to Life and an alternate delegate for National Right to Life. She speaks at their annual convention, giving a presentation on Down syndrome wherever they happen to be in the country, which has led to some very interesting road trips for Eileen. And she's also done local TV and radio, including EWTN, which is not local, international, with me. We did Faith and Culture. It's a show that with Colleen Carroll Campbell a few years ago. We flew out to St. Louis to do that one. So I met Eileen online several years ago because we both have daughters with Down syndrome, and we started a group called Keep Infants with Down Syndrome. And welcome, Eileen, to the show.
Hi, Leticia. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. I think I know you, 12 years, maybe more? A couple years before I moved to Connecticut.
About 10 years, because we started talking about kids in 2008.
There you go. See, she's better than I am. That's when I was moving from Long Island to Connecticut to Watershed.
That's
my
right.
life, grew up in Long Island all my life. I moved to Connecticut, made friends in New England, and headed down to Washington within 3 months, and that's where we met at Family Research Council with Senator, at the time, Senator Sam Brownback, saying hello to our children. I admired him greatly because a couple of years before that, he had shown me an article which moved him very much. It was in the Wall Street Journal, where our friend Dr. Brian Scottco had talked about the high level of abortion among babies prenatally diagnosed with Down syndrome. And it moved him, although he doesn't, I believe, have a family member with Down syndrome, it moved him so much so that he sponsored legislation which eventually passed, the Prenatally, Postnatally Diagnosed Conditions Awareness Act, which provided information for parents facing prenatal diagnosis. So he's always been close to my heart. He became a Catholic a few years ago, and I believe he's an ambassador now. Am I right? I know he was governor of Kansas after senator. And
Yeah,
didn't
I'm
he
not sure
become
what
an
he's doing
ambassador?
now.
I think he's in the Trump administration. I forget where he's an ambassador to, but he's just a true statesman and a kind-hearted man, and it was really cool that we met each other, and he was busy taking pictures with our kids at the same time. Wonderful guy. So how did you first become involved in the pro-life movement?
Well, it was after Sadie was born. Prior to that, I would call myself personally pro-life. I probably would have never had an abortion, but I didn't really feel like I could tell other, women what to do. But honestly, I didn't really pay that much attention to the, to it. I don't even think I was really aware that there was a pro-life movement. I wasn't practicing my Catholic faith at that time, or I was just starting to come back, I think, when Sadie was born.
And what year was that? How old is she?
She was born in 1998.
1998.
So
okay. So you were just out there living your own life at the time, not getting involved.
Yeah. Yep. I was still working, and I think I was starting to come back to the church, but I wasn't quite there yet. And then, so after she was born, I learned, at the time, they were saying that it was 90% of babies with Down syndrome who are diagnosed in utero are aborted. And I just fell off my chair, because here I was with this beautiful infant girl who just gave us so much joy. And I was like, why? Why would anybody, abort a child like this? And I had no idea that the abortion rate was that high.
So you hadn't had prenatal diagnosis, Eileen?
I had not. No, we discussed it briefly, but just because I wasn't going to do anything about it, I didn't want to have further invasive testing, and so we never even. He says, "Well, there's no sense in having at the time, it was just the usual markers test." And
right, we didn't have the technology. We didn't have the technology we have now.
Right, we didn't have. Now, had we had the new testing that we have now, I probably would have done that. Sorry to
it can
say,
be done with a blood test. It's a very a pretty accurate. I've heard 80% accurate blood test, which is merely a screener. It's called non-invasive prenatal testing, and then they usually want you to do an amnio as a backup. But at least you're not doing an amnio without some kind of idea, a good idea, that there is something different with this child genetically.
Right. Yeah.
So it's much better, and that came out in 2011, which is way after either of our daughters was born.
That's right. Yep. So and then I remember watching the Today Show, and the topic of that day, they were having a gynecologist on, and they were going to talk about who should have an amnio. And I'm thinking, I gotta hear this, And so I was just becoming aware, just more aware of the messages that women were getting. And so I watched that show, and I cried, because it was just so, she just, well, the way I remember it is the guest gynecologist said, flippantly, and then if your baby has Down syndrome, you can decide what to do. You can decide whether to keep the pregnancy or not, something like that. And it just upset me. And my first activist thing that I did was to write Katie Couric and this guest gynecologist, and maybe gave them some suggestions for how they can probably, how they could word it in the future. And I never did hear back from them. But that was the first activist thing I did. And then from there, I started writing letters to the editor. So meanwhile, I was sort of a two-track thing. I started coming back to the faith more, but I also started inquiring. I started calling. I think I was calling the Vermont Right to Life office and asking questions. And so I was just learning more and more about what abortion was. And it took a while. I asked a lot of questions, and I wasn't quite ready to come on board fully. But then when I learned about partial birth abortion, and because at that time they were trying to get that law.
Right. That was during the Clinton administration. Yeah, that was during the Clinton administration had voted on it twice, I believe.
Right. And so then I remember asking, well, if we ban that, what's the alternative? And the alternative was just as bad. It was a D&E, intact D&E. So I just, that's it. I said, I can't, I've got to get involved with this. So, I just started going to local Right to Life meetings, and then eventually, the state board, so it was just a very kind of a gradual thing. And then meanwhile, I came back to the Catholic faith, and, so I was fully on board there. So that's kind of my story. And then after you and I did kids the first time in 2009, I was asked to present a workshop on Down syndrome for the National Right to Life convention. And so I did that, and so I've been doing it pretty much every year since, unless I can't make it for some reason. But in that presentation, I give information about what Down syndrome is. I bring in a lot of interesting facts that people might not know. I tell them about Jerome Lejeune and, information about him. There's just a number of things I talk about. But then I get into the, of course, why it's important to the pro-life movement to know about Down syndrome and the high abortion rate, and talk about prenatal testing, and I talk about legislation, and what it's like to have a research, the research that's going on with Down syndrome, and then, just what life is like. I tell our story. So it packs a lot of information in there. But, it's been, I'm very grateful for National Right to Life for including me because, they care very much about children and adults with Down syndrome. And
Eileen, why should pro-lifers care about infants with Down syndrome? Why should they care? What's special about them?
Well, because they are targeted. Of course, every child that's aborted is a tragedy. But there's a particular, evil about seeking out a person with a genetic condition and targeting them. They have a big bullseye on them in the womb, and I think that's and they get that too. Pro-lifers really are appalled that is a typical. That's become very routine in not just in our country but around the world.
Sure.
So
abortion rates are even higher in Europe, and in fact, Iceland was on CBS a few months ago bragging that they would eliminate Down syndrome from the population, and which is, on its face, it's impossible because it happens randomly throughout the population. It's not an inherited trait. At least 95% of Down syndrome cases are spontaneous.
Right.
Among all races, ethnic groups, etc. So it is more prevalent when the mother's older. But as you know, most moms of children with Down syndrome are younger. Why is that?
Well, so the way I understand it is, the way I understand it is there's just so many more women who are becoming pregnant in that age group, so much more that even
and they don't test. And they don't tend to test.
Well, they didn't. They probably do now, but historically they didn't test because they really only tested women who were 35 and over, and older. But also the fact that they're having so many more that even with the lower chance of having a child with Down syndrome, it still surpasses the amount of babies that are being born, under 30 to women, to mothers under 35. That's one of the concerns of this new prenatal testing that's non-invasive, because now they can offer it to, the American College of OBGYNs back in 2007 changed their recommendations to, instead of just offering the prenatal testing to older mothers, they opened it up to all pregnant mothers.
Right.
So not only is this accurate testing, becoming introduced, like you said, in 2011, but also many more mothers are being tested. So all those babies that were not being identified prior to this recommendation change were being born, and because they were unidentified. But statistics tell us that once they're identified, once they're diagnosed in utero, the statistics tell us that a high amount of those will be aborted.
That's right. So why do you think moms abort? What's your take on it? Why do you think moms expecting child with Down syndrome
I think that mothers think they're not going to love their children with Down syndrome. They have this very negative portrayal, because of the literature that's out there. It's very, they just list symptoms. They don't, list the whole, they can't list the whole person because they don't know what that person is going to be like. But
so the person is just a collection of what's wrong with this baby.
Right, heart attacks and very scary things. That I just wrote an article for National Right to Life that should be published in a tonight or tomorrow or something. But that's what I talk about is that there's these list of symptoms, and you can't know what your child is going to be like. I gave an example of some of the literature that's out there, and it was very, it talks about heart defects, it talks about small ears, it's, just things that are just very not attractive. And although my daughter, has some of those things that they list, I don't see her in that description whatsoever. like what I say in this article is I could have never predicted that she was going to be an American history buff, that she was going to be able to name the presidents from George Washington, all of,
wow.
We have to Rutherford
She's got me beat. She's got me beat.
Exactly.
I don't think I can do that.
And she loves American history. She loves to write. So just for the heck of it, she copied the whole Declaration of Independence a few years ago. And she just did the back and front of paper. And then the next year, she copied the whole U.S. Constitution, including the amendments. Just
goodness.
because she was interested, and her handwriting really improved through that process. And and then each feast day and each American holiday, she'll write a little reflection. You've probably seen me post those on Facebook.
I've seen it many times.
A little reflection, and she draws like a little picture. And she has this in a little notepad. And
I think Sadie's got a book in her future. What do you think?
Maybe. We could have never predicted that.
They didn't tell you that, right? They wouldn't have told you that if you had a prenatal diagnosis.
Right. And
they can't give you a full picture of this person.
And you can't do that with any child. You just don't know what their gifts are going to be, what their likes and their dislikes and their interests and abilities. You just can't predict that. And so to answer, your question, I think that mothers have a lot of fear of the unknown. And I think they think that they might not love their baby because of this description.
Mm-hmm.
How can I love a baby like that? And it's nothing like that. The reality of having a child with Down syndrome is it's like 180 degrees different from the descriptions.
Well, first of all, they're people, they're individuals. I mean, you have another daughter, Colleen, and she is a typical young lady. She's away at college right now. Mm-hmm. How are they different, other than Down syndrome and typical?
Oh, boy. Colleen never stops talking. She talks a lot. Sadie is more reserved, and she does have, her verbal skills, need improvement. They're improving. Mm-hmm. She's come a long way. But her personality is much more reserved. She's friendly. She's, she likes to be with people, but, she has a more reserved personality. Mm-hmm. One likes fruits, the other one likes vegetables.
That's right. Just like two sisters, and I bet they battle like sisters when
they did, but since
and love each other.
Yeah, exactly. No, they were the best of friends growing up, and of course they bickered too. But it really changed when Colleen went away to college because I think Sadie really missed her, and so now Sadie doesn't give her a hard time when she comes back.
Yeah, we get that too for about a week. We have my middle girl Bella's away at college, and we count the days till she comes back, and then it takes about a week until things are back to normal. A honeymoon, right. I call it. And so if she's only got a week at home, everything's rosy. But if we stay for more than a week, then some of the get out of my face stuff that teenagers normally do. My daughter, Christine, is 16, is slamming doors and locking doors. It's amazing how normal they are in some ways, despite, yes, there is a definite difference in somebody with Down syndrome. But you cannot put all people with Down syndrome into one basket simply because they have similar chromosomes, because there's a 60-point IQ range. And we have people like Karen Gaffney, whom I saw speak at Yale last weekend, who graduated community college and swam Lake Tahoe and swam the English Channel and relay. And by the way, Lake Champlain, didn't know that. That lake terrifies me. Yeah, it's so wide.
Oh, well, I
told her I can't even swim laps in the pool, and she laughed. She challenged anyone in the audience to try and beat her in the pool, and I bet they can't. And and Sadie can can name all the presidents, and I can't. So much for stereotypes, right? And as for not feeling adequate, I think that's where some of the mothers feel. I felt that way. I felt like, oh gosh, this is a challenge I can't handle. But you're only asked to handle one day at a time. You're not asked. You don't have to deal with their college education when they're infants for any child. You just have to deal with it today and feed that baby and love that baby and care for that baby one day at a time. And it's amazing how one day turns into a lifetime. And you can't imagine it without them.
Right, and that's what I remember someone telling me, is it doesn't happen all at once. When they're born, there's certain things you want to look out for. The hospitals usually know to check for a heart defect. They, and then there's usually the states, like our state was really good about having an early interventionist, who spends time with your baby and just makes sure, they're on the right track and everything. And
they come to your
so
house
there's
and they're
help,
free.
There's help for you, and right, and these people, we became very, we loved the early interventionist that Sadie had, and she became part of her life. And then she ended up being her preschool teacher in the public school, and Sadie, the program they have in the public school. So, you get to know this set of really, great people that are involved in their lives. But the thing is, you don't have to, but other than looking out for the health issues, a lot of the stuff doesn't come until way later, so they walk a little later. They will learn to walk, but, you don't have to worry about that when they're born. And really you just need to love them just like any other baby. You hold them and talk to them and, take care of them and everything that you do with other babies. And that's really all they are other babies. And you fall in love with them. And I have not met one person who has ever said, I wish my child wasn't born. Most mothers are going to say, I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't have changed the circumstances. I'm one of them. I just feel very blessed having this experience. It's really it just had such an impact in me, and not only feeling blessed that she's in my life and that I'm her mother, but also just the experience that goes along with it has really just opened me up in so many ways and made my life just so much more interesting,
And you were saying that you became interested in pro-life around the time Sadie was born. It sort of gave you a personal stake in the right to life issue. So how has that changed your life? You mentioned National Right to Life Convention. You give talks. And tell me some of the states you've been in through National Right to Life, where you've traveled to.
Oh, gosh, we've been to conferences in Tennessee, Florida, North Carolina, Minnesota, Texas. We usually, the girls and I usually go. Sometimes my husband goes, and we'll do a long,
you turn it into a family vacation. And
it is,
yeah. True homeschooling mom, you find some educational sites along the way. My favorite was just met North Dakota because I'm a Laura Ingalls fan.
Yeah, well,
we saw her home, right?
We did, yeah. We when we went out there. In fact, that was the first trip I did by myself with the girls. They were like 8 and 6, and I went halfway cross country by myself with them. And I kept asking myself the whole way, why am I doing this? This is crazy. But this was the year that Terry Schiavo died, and they were having a tribute to her out there with her family. And so I just kept telling myself, no, I have to be there. I have to be there. So I kept questioning what I was doing, but because it's a long way to go. But I just, with 2 young children, but I just knew I had to be there, and we couldn't fly. We just couldn't afford to fly. So I knew this was the only way to get out there, and I'm so glad I did. And the girls still remember that trip too, even though it was so long ago.
I bet they do. And so Sadie, in a sense, encouraged you to go beyond your comfort zone and to expand your horizons.
Absolutely, she has given me so much strength. Being her mother, I was always like somebody who I wasn't even going to walk across a stage. You couldn't get me to just walk out in front of people at all. And somehow I found the courage to do, it wasn't real good. I don't think, a great speaker, but, I do it anyway. But I'm not polished. But I still, I get out there. And the first time I did, it was terrifying. And of course, not everybody needs to get out there and speak. That's just the way I felt called to do.
Right.
And
it's not obligatory if you have a child with Down syndrome, but it does put a fire in your belly, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, it does. Yeah. And so it's given me a lot of strength in that way. She has. Yeah.
I felt like I was always going to be an author growing up, but I had nothing to say. I didn't know what I knew I had a talent, but I couldn't get off the home plate there. And when I had Christina, I finally said, somebody should say something about this. And I tried calling my doctor and saying something and talking to some of the new moms, and the answer was nope, nope, and nope. And I'm talking about moms that wanted to talk to someone, that needed to be reached out to, and the answer was always no. So finally, I resorted to starting a blog in October of 2006, and I said, well, someone needs to tell this story, and I'm not the best, but I'm me, and I have my truth, not my truth, I have the truth in my version of it. See, as Catholics, we believe there is a truth and the life, who's Christ. But as Catholic mothers that are living the gospel of life in the best we can through raising our daughters, especially those with special needs, we can give witness to the truth that life is a blessing, life is a gift, and that no matter what the world says, that our children have something to offer. Yeah,
and I found different ways to do that. You just reminded me of something that I haven't been involved in a few years, but one of the things I did when Sadie was young was we have a state organization. Well, it's a nonprofit. It's called something different now, but it used to be called Parent to Parent, and it was a network. It was an organization that connected parents with when they have a diagnosis, special needs diagnosis, to match them with another parent. And so I was a mentor. I got occasionally would get calls of somebody who was their baby was diagnosed with Down syndrome. Either it was a newborn was usually the ones I got, but then one day I got one from a mother who was pregnant with a baby with Down syndrome, and that was it was a little terrifying, to think that this life, but thanks be to God. I think I talked with 3 mothers who were pregnant with children with Down syndrome, and all 3 of them chose life.
Wow.
And you can't push your way. You have to be. No. You just have to tell, and I would just tell my story, and these 3 mothers, and I know. Right, actually, there was 3 or 4. Anyway, whatever it was just very thrilling, and I just felt so blessed that God used me in that way to encourage these moms. But the other programs they had with this organization was to go into the medical school, the regional medical school here. And they have programs where parents of children with special needs will go in and talk with the first-year medical students.
What a great!
They have a couple of different programs. So that's one of them. Another one is you get matched with a resident, like a third-year resident or something. I don't remember what the term was, but a resident. And they would come to your house and just so the whole.
Oh, that's brilliant!
And they would even. I think there's even a program where they would even they can accompany you, just like a soccer game with your child playing or whatever. But the whole idea was to enlighten, it's to teach these medical students what it's like to have a child with special needs, and see them in their home environment, in their natural environment, because when they are doctors, they're going to be seeing them in their office, and things are different, when the child gets brought to the office. They're not always, they could be scared, they could be, whatever. So this is a way of just getting to know the families and what they have to deal with. And so that was another, it was another way. And I always brought in the fact that these babies are being targeted, hoping that seed would be, would be implanted, that they would remember that. And,
because doctors are human beings, and they can't help but inject their opinion into their medical opinion. But because they're doctors, women, especially women who are feeling vulnerable and frightened, put a special weight on what they say. Many women that told their stories where a special mother was born felt very pressured by their doctors, who thought they were helping them by encouraging them to abort their child, or genetic counselors. They were feeling very pressured. Sometimes in an unfair way, like constantly pressured every time they went in. I know women that had to change their doctors because these doctors were convinced that this child was terrible. Now, you have to remember, some of these doctors went to medical school 30, 40 years ago, almost in the time when people with Down syndrome were institutionalized and were given basically no education. So the abilities of people in those days were limited very much by their environment. Now, thanks to Americans with Disabilities Act, the IDEA legislation, they have, as much as we can make it, equal opportunities for education. Things have changed quite a bit. So doctors don't always keep their education up. They may have formed their opinions back in the 70s and 60s. And they think that this would destroy their patient, the pregnant mom's life, and maybe the sibling's life. But we know better because Dr. Brian Scotco came out with a survey right in 2011 when the prenatal testing came out, and 99% of people with Down syndrome responded that they were happy with their lives. 97% of the siblings said that having a sibling with Down syndrome made them a better person. And 99% of the parents said they were happy with their person with Down syndrome. And I challenge you to find any population that are 99% satisfied, especially now with tragically high suicide rates. They're just happier people. It doesn't mean they smile every day and they never have a bad mood, for heaven's sakes. But it does mean that basically their lives are good.
Yeah,
regardless of the physical limitations that they may have.
Right. I think in general they're content people, and it doesn't mean they don't experience all the emotions that everyone else does, but they're special people.
There's not a lot of self-loathing among them. I don't see that anyway. They seem to be pretty self-assured, and maybe too much so sometimes. But we have to remind them they can't walk on water. But sometimes it's beautiful what they give to those around them. It's just unconditional acceptance. I see from Christina. I'd like to talk about kids. Keep it with Down syndrome. If you have a few more minutes.
Yes.
This is how we met. We met online, I believe, in some kind of a chat room. Or what did they have in those days before social media? I forgot. Was it social media?
Well, you had your blog, and actually how I found you was I was really interested in Dr. Jerome Lejeune.
Okay.
And you had a blog that you had to change the name. It was
too complicated.
Anyway,
in Latin.
No, it had to do with Dr. Jerome Lejeune.
Oh, right.
Or Catholic.
I wasn't an official. Yeah, I wasn't an official spokesperson for Lejeune. Dr. Jerome Lejeune is a French geneticist and physician who in 1958 was able to locate the cause of Down syndrome as trisomy 21, or an extra copy of the 21st chromosome. For that, he won the Kennedy Award and the Allen Award for genetics, which is the highest award, but never the Nobel Peace Prize. And we think it's because, and he thought at the time it was because he challenged doctors when he received the Allen Award to bring ethics into the burgeoning field of genetics and to think about what they were doing. And because every scientific discovery that we put into action has an effect on society, as the prenatal testing did. Prenatal testing became possible because Dr. Lejeune invented the karyotype, where you line up the genes and see what you got. You say, oh, wait, we have an extra 21st chromosome. If you didn't line them up and classify them, you wouldn't know that. So between that and amnio, which was the putting a needle in the womb of the pregnant woman and taking some amniotic fluid and then doing the karyotype, this wouldn't have been possible. Now, the reason he developed it was to help us to make these babies healthier by doing prenatal interventions. For example, I met a lady at the Yale conference last weekend, Vita Veritas Pro-Life Conference, who had baby Theo, who's 3 months old with Down syndrome and has wonderful muscle tone. He holds his head up and he's very active. She took something she said is akin to Prozac prenatally. She's participating in clinical trials for prenatal treatment of an unborn baby. She obviously had prenatal testing, or she wouldn't have known. And this kid is doing amazing. I couldn't believe when she said something like Prozac. It's not exactly Prozac, but that's the slang term for it. And that child was amazingly alert and good muscle tone. And if that's what helped him be that way, well, maybe there's something in the future for them. But so prenatal testing can be used for good. That was Dr. Jones' intent initially. Right,
and you just brought up something like the one thing that I always say, and actually I say it in this article that I just wrote, is that a lot of, especially in Europe, they seem to be really big on blaming prenatal testing for and there seems to be these parent advocates who are against this, the government's using prenatal testing, these new tests. But then they go on to say that they're pro-choice. So one of the things that I say is that the prenatal testing is not, in and of itself is not bad. In fact, it can be very good. Like in the example that you just gave about using that prenatal testing and then trying some therapy that hopefully is going to help the child. So the problem isn't the prenatal testing. The problem is abortion. If there was no such thing as abortion, that it wasn't legal and couldn't be done, then prenatal testing would be a non-event. It would just be information. And then we have to remember that it's because abortion is legal that's what really threatens the unborn.
Exactly, Eileen.
syndrome.
And there's some states that have actually passed laws, Ohio being one of them, I think one of the Dakotas, that has made abortion because of Down syndrome illegal. And I believe they're both held up in court. I don't know if it's ever been
the one in I think it's North Dakota. I think it's North Dakota. That one I think holds. The other ones I think have all been challenged.
Right.
And I don't know whether they are enforceable, but they do send a message, that that discrimination starts in the womb,
That's
and
right.
this is really discrimination.
So I'm going to jump in here with a passage from Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life, in which Pope St. John Paul II in 1992 addressed this. He said, special attention must be given to evaluating the morality of prenatal diagnostic techniques, which enable the early detection of possible anomalies in the unborn child. In view of the complexity of these techniques, an accurate and systematic moral judgment is necessary. When they do not involve disproportionate risks for the child and the mother, which non-invasive testing doesn't involve risk, it's a blood test for the mother, and are meant to make possible early therapy, or even to favor a serene and informed acceptance of the child not yet born. These techniques are morally licit. Okay, There's not, like you said, nothing immoral with finding out that you're going to have a child with a disability. But since the possibilities of prenatal therapy are today still limited, if not infrequently happens that these techniques are used with eugenic intention, which accepts selective abortion in order to prevent the birth of children affected by various types of anomalies. Such an attitude is shameful and utterly reprehensible, since it presumes to measure the value of a human life only within the parameters of normality and physical well-being, thus opening the way to legitimizing infanticide and euthanasia as well. And we're seeing euthanasia in Canada now, and I believe in Belgium, of children without even the parents' knowledge. It's terrifying how abortion is that way, because as Pope St. John Paul says, we evaluate the worthiness of human life. That somebody with an extra chromosome is worth less. And that brings us back to the Nazis. Eugenics started in the United States, but the Nazis perfected it in its evil side. Eugenic actually means good birth, but the Nazis bred people with so-called good German genes, the blonde hair, blue-eyed, strong young people. They asked them to reproduce. But those like our children who were in institutions they committed genocide, and they were the beginnings of the Nazi Holocaust, was killing those with mental illness and disabilities in the institutions. Again, euthanasia. So, you cannot judge one life worthy of life and another one not without running a risk of falling into this horrible, horrible mistake. So we're out there saying, life is beautiful for our young women, so that others that are in fear and that are hearing such negative things can take courage and say, you know what, I don't feel up to this. I certainly didn't. I was like, when I figured out that my daughter had Down syndrome, I was like, God, you got the wrong person. There's no way I can deal with this. You know me, right? I have no patience. I'm disorganized. I can't deal with this. And the feeling I got that God was saying to me is, just one day at a time, watch this, okay? And one day at a time, my daughter has helped me, through the grace of God, to grow in my ability to be a mother. And being a better mother than I would have been. And I can look back in 16 years and say, wow, I've come a long way. Thank you, Christina.
Right.
And then, then I blow it and I do something silly. But you know what? I always pick up and try again.
Yeah, and, just seeing mothers who will speak up, the blogs that we've talked about that are very helpful, the parents that have blogs, and just seeing that as an encouragement. I know when Sadie was born, one of the things that helped me was knowing someone told me that there was a list for a waiting list for adopting babies with Down syndrome. And I remember thinking, well, the only difference between us and them is we didn't ask for it, but if they can do it, we can do it, and that was a real encouragement, just knowing that there were people who are willing to adopt babies with Down syndrome.
That's right. And more than one sometimes. I knew Barbara Curtis, who has since passed away, that she had one son with Down syndrome, and she's a large homeschooling mom in Virginia, who's passed since then. But she adopted two more young men with Down syndrome, and was frequently interviewed by the Washington Post because they found that so unusual, and yet her family was so engaging. Her daughter even got into what was it, America's Got Talent, or American Idol. And the story was told nationwide in the YouTube campaign. It was very popular. So the joy of even adopting a child with Down syndrome sort of shows the world that they're gifts and that they have a lot to give, and that just because we can test for something doesn't mean that it's bad necessarily, and we need to look to those that are living the life before we make a judgment. My first phone call when I was in the hospital with a newborn with Down syndrome was to a parish, through my pastor, a lady at my parish, Marge, whose daughter, Krista, was the youngest of 10 and had Down syndrome. She's 21, going to be 21. She worked at her local grocery store. She walked to work. She was bagging bread, and she had graduated high school. And her biggest problem was finding a venue big enough for her 21st birthday party because the entire world wanted to attend. And I said, wow, what a happy kid, happy 21-year-old. If only all my daughters can be that happy, none of them are 21 yet, I'll be content with their lives, because isn't that what you want? As a Catholic mom, you want your child in heaven, but as a human mom, you want your child to enjoy the ride and not be miserable along the way. And I think if people told Christina she was miserable, she'd look at them like, what's your problem? Obviously don't know what you're talking about. So a bit more about kids. So we decided in, I believe it was January 2009, to meet at the Family Research Council. They have a wonderful blog. Well, it used to be called Pro-Life Blogs, but now what is it called? Pro-Life Con. Yeah, Pro-Life Con at their headquarters in D.C. every year before the March for Life. And we don't have time anymore, but we met there. And then we walked over to National Right to Life headquarters, where we meet now. Right,
and National Right to Life has National Right to Life has hosted us every year, that we've done this, and they generously offer us refreshments before the March for Life, and just a place to meet, and it's been just a wonderful experience. So that first year, we had families come. You and I did you had your networking, and you put the word out there, and we contacted some media, I think, and also you had contacted Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rogers' office, and we met there after the march, and that was really exciting. We know that Congresswoman McMorris Rogers has a son with Down syndrome, and so she welcomed us
while she was
in her office for a private meeting, and we spent an hour with us, so the next year we invited her to our event, and she came to several of them, like 4 or 5 of them. She was able to come, and that was really nice. But it's just we have several families that come every year. There's one family who has made it every single year. I think they might have missed last year, but so it's we meet at National Right to Life. There's refreshments. We have Congresswoman McMorris Rogers if we can get her, and then somewhere around noon we get gather together, and we outside the the office. We take pictures. We have a banner. We have, balloons, and we go join the march over by the mall. And sometimes we stick
have
together.
Special friends.
And sometimes we don't.
Yeah, we lose you.
Oh, yes, we have.
Very crowded. The Order of Alhambra joins us.
That's right, yeah.
It's a Catholic Christian organization that specializes in helping those with special needs. So they come in their uniforms.
And they come every year.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They have customized kid signs.
Yeah, and, it's really great to, we're probably the only group that's in that march that represents that population of, I'm sure there's individuals who march for the same reason, but our group is one that the whole purpose is to gather families together and represent the babies, the unborn babies with Down syndrome in the march, and to bring awareness to them being targeted. So,
and when we started, Eileen, there wasn't much attention being paid to the fact that our children were targeted, but I think that has grown quite a bit.
Right. Well, we hit it right about the time where Sarah Palin was chosen for the vice president, and when she ran with John McCain, and that really brought a lot of awareness to Down syndrome.
I remember a lot of hits on my blog because they were Googling Sarah who? and my blog was one of the things that came up because she was in Alaska, and not as many people were familiar, and the fact that she had her son, it was just
right. I did not know who she was until she had her son.
I did. So. I remember I was on the Throgsneck Bridge. I almost drove off the bridge. Curtis Lewa mentioned it. I'm like, Sarah Palin. Oh my gosh, I know her. And, she and Kathy Morris Rogers were two of my role models, being women in public life. Sarah was a governor of Alaska when she discovered that she had was expecting a child with Down syndrome, and Kathy Morris Rogers was a congresswoman. So obviously it didn't affect their careers at all, and they kept going, and then inadvertently, like we did, became, role models of moms who have a child with Down syndrome. I mean, the Lejeune Society at one point had a motto, Down syndrome, so what? In other words, life goes on, like the show. Some of us might remember, older people, the show Life Goes On with Corky, the character Corky, Chris Burke, right. He was from Long Island. He still is. He's
I don't think I actually have ever seen that show, actually.
Oh, well, you should. I have the whole series. I bought it. It came out. And it was just a typical Patti LuPone from my hometown of Northport, New York, was the mom. And it was, I think, 2 kids in the family, and Corky was a character with Down syndrome as a teenager, and it showed the ups and downs of living with Down syndrome. And I remember one particular scene was poignant because he wanted to play football, and because of a similar problem that a lot of people with Down syndrome have, they have a little axial instability in the neck. I probably said that wrong. Roughhousing in sports like that, high contact sports, are not a good idea. So he couldn't play it. So it was realistic, and it gave us, in the public, an idea of what life was like, and that indeed life goes on. Now we have, what's that other one, the show that's out now, Born This Way on A&E.
Born This Way, yeah.
It's a reality show of young people with Down syndrome, and they just had a marriage. 2 of the characters got married on TV, which I remember back in, it was like 2007, I was invited to a screening of a film called Mr. Blue Sky, which was a story of a young woman with Down syndrome who got married. And that was kind of shocked a lot of people that a person with Down syndrome could get married. Now, certainly not everyone with Down syndrome is capable of such an adult decision, or they may not be able to live completely independently. But there are cases like the documentary Monica and David, where a young couple living in her parents' home were able to marry and have a beautiful commitment. In fact, there's an elderly couple, I believe, that have been married for decades. I just read about recently.
Yeah, I remember seeing that a little while ago.
So it's not impossible. I mean, I don't think my daughter would be capable of that. She's more limited intellectually, but it's certainly, we shouldn't say that nobody can. And in fact, for people with Down syndrome, they don't like limits being put on them, do they? Being told what they can and cannot do.
Right.
And another thing Kathy Morris Rogers was famous for is she started the Congressional Down Syndrome Caucus, which was both sides of the aisle. In fact, she had a Representative Kennedy from Rhode Island. He's no longer in Congress, but the Kennedy family has had Rosemary, I talked about in a previous show, who had mental disabilities, and they have always supported Special Olympics. They started Special Olympics and
Right.
best friends, best buddies. So, the Kennedy member, I think it was Patrick Kennedy, was part of it. So she started that, and she also, with our support, of course, pushed for a National Institute of Health funding more research to treat Down syndrome.
That's right.
And
yeah.
an amazing research has come from it. We can't say we're curing Down syndrome, but we're learning a lot about it. And we're learning, for example, ways to help people with Down syndrome live more productive and healthy lives. There was a time that most of the research was focused on avoiding having a child with Down syndrome, prenatal testing. Now, a lot of the research, thanks to the parents, because there are, get me right, there used to be 400,000 people with Down syndrome in this country, but they've had to lower the number. Eileen, are you aware of how
Yeah,
many
I think I want to say they say it's around 200,000 now,
Yeah.
200,
400,000 was
250,000,
old.
something like that.
Yes, but the good news is the life expectancy doubled since the 80s, from
Right.
25 to 50, because of some of these advances that we're talking about.
Right, and not just that, but the quality of life too. So
That's
they're
right.
living longer lives, but they're living longer, better lives.
Right.
With
with
more knowledge,
jobs, with meaningful programs. So we have a restaurant in the next town from us in Connecticut, which employs those with special needs and gives them the support they need. They bake. They have a bakery,
Yeah.
they have a greenhouse, and they have a restaurant, and they also have a day program. So whatever level the young person is at, and I hope my Christina will join them soon, they have a level that they can become involved in the community. And it's such a fun restaurant. Christina really feels like she belongs, and she belongs everywhere, but particularly she can relate to the people that are working there. And one of our state legislators, Ann Dalphiny, has a daughter that works there as well. So we're lucky to have a state legislator that understands what it's like to have a child with disabilities. And she's very pro-life. She's a wonderful, not mine, unfortunately. My representative is great, too. He's pro-life, and we're really blessed. Connecticut's a blue state, but not everywhere. So he has been very supportive, and he's met Christina on several occasions. And so our children become sort of diplomats for life. I interviewed Kurt Condrich a few months ago, and he helped pass Chloe's Law, named after his daughter with Down syndrome.
Right, that's right, in Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, so to give support to parents expecting a child with Down syndrome. So, and has spoken at the UN. I was at the UN, and my book was sold at the UN. I didn't get to speak, but Kurt Condrich, with his daughter, has actually appeared and spoke in favor of those with Down syndrome having the right to life in the UN, which is just mind-blowing. Who would have thought when we started that people like us would be speaking in the UN, speaking on television? You and I both hated public speaking. I remember dreading it for weeks when I had a public speaking engagement coming up, and here I am, on the radio. But the importance is that we have a message, and the message is what? Life is beautiful.
Well, it is, and also, not just, of course, that's the message, but also that you can't know what your child's going to be like for prenatal testing. It's prenatal testing can't tell you what your child's going to be like, and you shouldn't go by that. Just encourage that life is not going to be what you think it is. It's going to be much better, and that anyone can do it. I just cringe when I read these comments in blogs that say, well, I could never do it. Well, you don't know that, because it's not that difficult. It really isn't. Yes, there are some challenges, and that's not I don't want to paint a totally rosy picture. There are some challenges, but they pale in comparison to the joy that your child is going to give you, and the impact that child's going to have, not only on your life, but your family's life, and your community, in your church, your parish or whatever. You just have no idea how that child is going to impact the world around her, and we need more of that, and they impact it in a very good way. I've had we had a babysitter who went into special education just because of Sadie.
Wow.
We've had I think we've had a couple of those, but just people are very are very touched, and
my daughters are nurses.
They radiate love, you know.
My daughters are nurses because they saw Christina with her birth to 3 interventionists coming into the house and how much she benefited from them. So they both were inspired by that, and we're reaping the benefits of that. As we draw to the close of the program, what advice would you say to a woman expecting a child with Down syndrome who thinks that she can't do it?
Well, I would say that it's normal to fear, to have fear, and it's normal to be sad at the diagnosis. When I say it's normal, it's not. I'm just saying that a lot of women do, and that's okay. But
right, not everyone embraces the news with great joy at the first moment. They have
right,
to go through a process
it's actually more typical to be disappointed, you know, or sad or afraid. But if you abort your child, the fear may go away, but the sadness will always remain. But if you bring your child to birth, you'll find out that your fear was much greater than, you know, the reality. The reality is so much better, and that child will turn your sadness into joy.
Beautiful.
That's what I would tell.
Beautiful.
That's what I would tell.
Absolutely beautiful.
Expecting mothers.
Well, we are just now seeing the potential of these beautiful individuals with Down syndrome as we've helped them to develop it in this country, and we're the richer for it. And the more that we can embrace diversity, I like to call it genetic diversity. I don't know if that's really a term, but there is a term in biology. But in the sense that if we are not going to judge people by their skin color, their sexual orientation, then why should we judge them by how many genes they have? Why should we put them in a preconceived category where we know whether that person's life is worth living or not? You know, nobody could tell, well, my mother did prenatal testing, but if they had, no one would have known the abilities that I had and the disabilities. Right now I'm disabled. I have some health issues. But most of us develop health issues throughout our life, and most of us would agree that life is worth living and to continue regardless of whatever it is that we can't do. Because, you know, as life takes some things away, God gives us other things.
Right.
You know, I didn't have a radio show before I had a bad back, you know, and I can do that with it. So it's not that I traded it, trust me. But so some things come and some things go. But the most important thing is we're not the sum total of our abilities. We're here for a purpose, and God has a purpose for each one of our lives. God has a plan. And the thing to do is to say, when you're faced with something that you can't handle, Lord, help me through this. And you know what God tends to do? Remind you of the other times in your life that you said that. You know, when David was facing Goliath, God reminded him that when he was a shepherd, he beat back a bear and a lion. And he said, remember the lion and the bear? And David got courage from the fact that, yeah, you know, I beat those in my past. And I'm sure every woman who's expecting a child with Down syndrome has had some challenge in her life that she felt unequal to, and then now that challenge is in her past. It's in her in her resume, so to speak. So thank you so much for coming, for sharing the story of Sadie. By the way, what's Sadie doing nowadays? I forgot to ask you what she's up to.
Well, she graduated or walked with her class last year. She was a senior, and this year she's in high school. Yeah, this year she's in a bridging program. This wonderful program that helps young adults with special needs who are in that age group of 18 to 21. You know, they're done with high school, but they're not, you know, they're not quite. Anyway, it helps them in that transition, and they have this program is just wonderful. They take them to different places of employment, but they also do these activities. They a couple of weeks ago they brought them to a public access TV station.
Wow! Oh,
and
that's right.
They interviewed someone. So each of the students asked a question to this person, and they broadcasted it. They had it on. You could watch it on public access TV, and so that was really fun. So they do things with Vermont Adaptive Sports. That's another wonderful organization that helps people with special needs go skiing or biking or kayaking, or Sadie went sailing. She's never been sailing before.
So they took her out sailing.
So they do fun things like that. So it's this wonderful program, and that's what she's doing right now. So she goes part-time,
I'm so glad to hear
still
it.
to the high school and part-time to the bridging.
So maybe in the future we'll check back and see what Sadie's up to, TV, writing. Speaking. We'll see what she's doing and her wonderful mom. Thank you so much, Eileen, for being part of the program.
Thank you, Leticia. Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in to Living the Gospel of Life.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.